Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Robert Lustig.
Well, thank you, Jan. Thank you all. Who here does not speak English? Just so I know. Everyone speaks English. Very good, excellent. So I wanted to tell you that that was the best political presentation I have ever heard in my entire life because I did not understand a word of it. Anyway, welcome. And I want to thank Jan and Lilleman, number one, for purchasing the rights to my book, which will be out in January. Little plug, but also for all of you for coming. Hopefully I will try to put some sense into this whole dietary debacle that we have found ourselves in over the last 40 years in some fashion that hopefully makes sense to everyone in the room, that everyone can find something to take home from this. Okay, first of all, I have no disclosures. No food industry concern is putting me up to this, I promise you. All right, the talk is called Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise. I want to take them in turn. So, first question, are we healthy? What do you think? So this is the past in America, 2001, 12 years ago. 6 million kids are seriously overweight. Well, with all of the media attention, with all of the NIH funding, with all of the clinical programs, and with Michelle Obama's vegetable gardens, we are now up to 20 million. Here's the present. Currently, there are 30% more obese people walking the planet than there are undernourished people. 15 years ago, it was exactly the opposite. And so this is happening in countries that still have undernutrition. So you've got people with obesity living right next to people with undernutrition. This does not look like a behavior. This looks like an exposure. This looks just the way cholera or influenza or any other infectious disease would pattern itself in terms of propagation. 371 million diabetics last year walking the earth. That's 6% of the world's population. And they are chewing through all the healthcare resources of the entire world to the point where 2 years ago, Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations, announced that chronic metabolic disease, non-communicable disease, that is, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, now posed a bigger threat to the developing world than to the developed world. And this means reallocation of resources. 35 million people in the developing world every year dying of chronic metabolic disease, unheard of. And here's the future, at least in America, if we do nothing. 165 million Americans, that's 42% obese by 2030. Those of you who have visited America probably think we're up to that already. 100 million Americans diabetic by 2050. That'll be 1/3 of the population. There won't be any money for anything else, but it really won't matter because Medicare will be broke by the year 2026. So we will all be either giving it away or we'll have stopped practicing. Well, I'm going to be 69 in 2026, and excuse me, I want my friggin' Medicare. Now, this is probably the most important set of slides that I'm going to show you. And if you do not understand this, you cannot understand what is going on or any way to fix it. This is a Venn diagram of the United States adult population. 30% obese here and 70% normal weight here. Okay? Everyone thinks that this is about obesity, that obesity is the problem. Because 80% of obese people are metabolically ill in some fashion. They get type 2 diabetes, they get hypertension, they get dyslipidemia, they get cardiovascular disease, they get cancer, and they get dementia. And it is these 57 million, that's 80% of 30%, that are driving health costs through the roof and causing the decline of American society. It is their fault. This is incorrect. This is the mistake. Here's what's really going on. Yes, 80% of obese people are metabolically ill, I agree. That means 20% of obese people are not. 20% of obese people have completely normal metabolic parameters, will live a completely normal life, die at a completely normal age, not cost the taxpayer a dime. They are just fat. Conversely, 40% of the normal weight population have the exact same metabolic diseases as do the obese. They are insulin resistant when you assess their insulin parameters. They get type 2 diabetes, they get hypertension, they get dyslipidemia, they get cardiovascular disease, they get cancer, and they get dementia also. They just happen to be normal weight. So when they go to the doctor says, well, you're normal weight, don't worry about it. Except there are 67 million of them compared to the 57 million over here. They actually cost us more, and they don't know they have a problem, and they're nasty to these guys. So when you add it all up, that's more than 1/2 of the American population that has metabolic disease. This is a public health crisis. This is not about personal responsibility, because you can be normal weight and be sick as well. Now, how do I know that? Here's how I know that. These are equally weighted adult men. One of them is healthy, one of them is sick. Which one's sick? Someone said A. Everyone agree? Who's sick? Someone said B. Who here says A? Raise your hand. One person? Who says B? B is sick. B is sick. This guy over here, he's just got big love handles, that's all. Something to grab onto in bed. But this guy over here, that's internal fat. That's fat around the organs. And this has a name. It's called TOFI. Thin on the outside, fat on the inside. It's a medical term coined by Jimmy Bell, an imager at University College London, to explain how this can happen. So the fact is, it has nothing to do with obesity. The key to the kingdom is it's not about obesity. It never was. The food industry wants you to believe it's about obesity because then they can hide behind lack of exercise, lack of sidewalks, lack of physical education in schools, and every other subterfuge that they use to divert attention from what it is that they are doing to foment this. What it's about is about the metabolic dysfunction, and anyone can get it, even normal weight people. If you fix the obesity, the metabolic disease will improve. This is wrong. It's the other way around. If you fix the metabolic disease, the obesity will improve of its own volition. And I will show you that right now. To understand how this works, first you have to have a little bit of science, and I'm going to do it very quickly. This is the neuroendocrine loop involved in energy balance, and it's a servo mechanism just like the thermostat in your house. You do have thermostats here in Norway. Okay. All right. So here are 4 hormones right here. And we're not going to talk about these two here, ghrelin and peptide YY. They're important. They dictate minute-to-minute hunger versus satiety. Ghrelin is the hunger hormone, peptide YY is the satiety hormone, and it has to do with each meal. What we are going to talk about instead are these 2 hormones over here, leptin and insulin. And they are very interesting, and they tell us the story. Leptin, and I'm sure you've all heard of leptin by now, it's out there in the literature, is a hormone that the fat cell makes, which tells the brain that you've got enough energy on board to engage in expensive metabolic processes. You can burn energy at a normal rate, you can engage in puberty, you can engage in pregnancy, and you can reproduction, and the species continues. Because leptin is telling the hypothalamus, the area of the brain that controls all of this, what's going on. So leptin is a hormone of adiposity adequacy. Then you've got insulin. And insulin's really cool because insulin does 2 things all at the same time in opposite directions. Insulin is the hormone that drives energy into fat cells. Insulin is the energy storage hormone. So with insulin, you store. Diabetics take shots of insulin. Blood sugar goes down because it went to fat for storage. There is no energy storage without insulin. Insulin shunts sugar to fat. Insulin makes fat. More insulin, more fat. You can take that to the bank. That's just fact of life. But what's happening up top when insulin works on the brain is something entirely different. When insulin goes up after a meal, that's part of the satiety signal. The brain's saying, hey, I'm in the middle of metabolizing a meal. I got all these calories I got to deal with. I don't need to eat anymore. And so it's part of the satiety system. So it's telling the fat cell store, and it's telling the brain stop, all at the same time, in two different directions, which is kind of cool. So all of this information is integrated up in the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus will then dictate one of two states from the information that comes up here to the upper hypothalamus. It will either say, I've got enough energy on board, so I'm not hungry and I can burn it, or I don't have enough energy on board, in which case I'm going to be hungry and I'm going to conserve it. Those are the two, and I will show you that on the next set of slides. What happens then is that the information filters down to the autonomic nervous system, that part of the nervous system that you can't control. The sympathetic nervous system, which burns energy and goes to your fat cell and causes the release of fat, which is called lipolysis, and that's to get rid of energy, or to the vagus nerve, which innervates the entire viscera, including the pancreas, to make more insulin in order to increase your appetite and to store it. So, these hormones tell the brain what's going on peripherally, and these two parts of the nervous system tell the body what to do to try to keep you in negative energy balance. Everybody with me so far? Okay. Well, something goes wrong. What goes wrong? To explain what goes wrong, I have to explain a paradox. Here's the paradox. Who here has children? Good. What happens if you give a 5-year-old kid a cookie? You get Dr. Enfeld to tell you that was the wrong thing to do. That's what you get. So what happens if you get a 5-year-old kid a cookie? They bounce off walls. It's called the sugar high. Okay? And every kindergarten teacher knows that the cupcakes for the birthday parties come out at the end of the day, not in the middle of the day, because as soon as you give the cupcakes, that's the end of the lesson. Okay? What happened? Well, here's what happened. The fat cell filled with fat from the cookie, the leptin level went up, went to the hypothalamus, told the hypothalamus, I've got more energy on board. The sympathetic nervous system activates, and that then goes to the fat cell and causes the release of fatty acids, and also goes to the muscles to cause muscle twitching, and that's the sugar high, and that's why all these kids fidget. So when you see kids going like this in class, good, you're preventing obesity. Now, the paradox is, what happens if you give an obese 5-year-old kid a cookie? They're in the pantry looking for more cookies. Anybody ever see a sugar high in an obese kid? Doesn't exist. Doesn't exist. And that's why they're obese, because they don't get a sugar high, because they aren't seeing the leptin rise, because they are leptin resistant. Their brain is not interpreting the leptin signal. If their brain were interpreting the leptin signal, they wouldn't be obese. So obesity equals leptin resistance. And what your brain sees when it can't see the leptin, what your brain senses is starvation. So obesity and starvation are actually the same disease. Not peripherally, but centrally. Obesity equals brain starvation. Ask any obese person how they feel, and they will list you a set of symptoms. And if you asked a starved person how they felt, they would be the exact same set of symptoms. Because obesity and brain starvation are leptin resistance. Everybody got that? Really important notion to understand. Now, anybody recognize this patient over here? This is the leptin deficient mouse. So this mouse can't make leptin. He's got gene deletions in both alleles, and he cannot make leptin. His leptin level is 0. So his brain sees starvation all the time. And so this animal will eat anything in sight. But more importantly, this animal is the ultimate couch potato. This animal will not move. If you put this animal in a cage, he will just stay where you put him. The only reason this animal ever gets off his hiney is if you put the food on the other side of the cage, then they'll waddle over there, eat all the food there, and stay there instead. Everybody got it? The reason is because this animal's brain thinks he is starving all the time because there's no leptin to tell him otherwise, because he has a gene defect. Now, how does this work? So here's your fat cell making leptin, and this animal can't do it. The leptin goes to the hypothalamus. And if the brain can see that leptin signal because there's enough of it and because there's good signal transduction at the level of the brain, then you're in this little diamond over here called anorexigenesis. That means I'm not hungry, I don't need to eat everything on the Frühstück buffet this morning, okay? And I can burn energy at a normal rate. And so your sympathetic nervous system tone goes up, and your vagal tone, which tells you about hunger and insulin, goes down. So your pancreas makes less insulin. Conversely, if something gets in the way of that leptin signaling, either because the leptin level is low, like this animal, or because something gets in the way of the signal itself, then you're going to be in this diamond over here, orexigenesis. I'm hungry. I need more food. Worse yet, because I'm hungry, because my brain's starving, I'm going to store it, which means I'm going to conserve, and I'm not going to move. And so your sympathetic nervous system tone goes down, and your vagal tone goes up instead. And this is that same servo mechanism I showed you before, except now in schematized fashion. Everybody with me? Now, there are leptin-deficient people. 14 of them at last count. They're all of Pakistani and Turkish extraction, and they all live in the UK or Turkey, and they're all consanguineous marriages. Here's an example of a leptin-deficient patient, normal weight at birth, by age 6 months already massively obese, and continues to gain weight so that here at age 10 the kid weighs 100 kilos. A disaster, a complete, utter disaster. And the reason is because this boy's leptin isn't there. His leptin is 0. But then they start giving him leptin in graded doses by injection once a day. And look what happens. He loses weight on a dime. And it's all fat mass. His lean mass stays the same. Hormone replacement therapy. It's what I do as an endocrinologist. When a hormone's missing, give it back. We're giving back the leptin he's missing. And it works. It's beautiful. It's perfect. And here's an example. 3.5 years old before leptin injection started, and here he is at age 8, getting a leptin injection every single day for the next 4 years, indistinguishable from normal. This is perfect for 14 people. It's fantastic for them. Okay, what about the rest of us? By the way, does anybody think this is gluttony and sloth? Does anybody think this is personal responsibility? Does anybody think this kid had a choice? Good. What about the rest of us? You know, for 14 people, that's great. What about all of us? Well, we're not leptin deficient. We are leptin resistant. We got boatloads of leptin, and it correlates with how much body fat we have. And the more body fat we have, the more leptin we have. Except that if our leptin worked, we wouldn't have that body fat, because it would go to the brain, tell our brain to burn it off, not eat so much, and the fat would go down. So that's what's going on in obesity, is leptin resistance. Something is blocking that leptin from signaling the hypothalamus what's going on. This X right here with this question mark, this is the holy grail of obesity, right here. And when we understand that, we can solve this problem. So what is it? What is this X? That's what we're talking about. All right, remember insulin? So what does insulin do in this story? Okay, remember, it does 2 funky things. It tells your fat cell, store, and it tells your brain, stop. Except it doesn't. That's the problem. It only does it sometimes. Here's an example. This is a patient that got me started in obesity way back in 1995. When I worked at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, I had a lot of patients with brain tumors. And here's this kid's brain tumor right here. Okay, a big goomba sitting right in the middle of his energy balance pathway. Okay? And he needed surgery, and he needed radiation. At age 7, this child was completely normal weight for height. And then he required surgery and radiation, ended up panhypopituitary, had to replace all of his hormones, and he started gaining weight at the rate of 30 pounds per year non-stop after that, to his current weight of 364 pounds. This form of intractable obesity, due to a brain tumor or because of radiation, because those neurons are now dead. So the leptin is up, but the brain can't see it because the neurons that transduce the signal are gone. We call this hypothalamic obesity. Now, does anybody think this is gluttony and sloth? Does anybody think this is personal responsibility? Okay. So how does this work? So two hypotheses. One, damage to the hypothalamus causes obesity because it damages a satiety center. Or damage to the hypothalamus leads to obesity because it changes the vagus nerve and the vagal firing rate, because now you can't see your leptin, so your vagus nerve goes into overdrive, driving excess insulin release, and that excess insulin deposits energy into fat. Now, if this were the case, nothing I could do about it, because I can't fix a brain. But if this were the case, it gives me a place where I could potentially intervene in between the vagus nerve and the beta cell. And there's a drug that inhibits insulin release at the level of the beta cell, and it's called octreotide, and it's an endocrine medication, and I know how to use it. And so we asked the question many years ago, if we gave octreotide to kids with this form of obesity, called hypothalamic obesity, due to brain tumors, could we reverse the process? That was the question. Well, here's that patient, 364 pounds, 1 year later, 326, first time he took his picture with his shirt off. And this patient is the pièce de résistance. This patient isn't even my patient. This is a beautiful, young, 13-year-old girl in Hawaii. Notice the lily in her hair. And 1 month after this picture was taken, she was in a terrible car accident on a Honolulu highway. And she was in the intensive care unit for a month in a coma. She came out of the coma, and this is her 1 year later, because she stroked her hypothalamus. No brain tumor, but the equivalent. She stroked her hypothalamus. Now, does anybody really want to tell me that that's gluttony and sloth, that that's personal responsibility? So I was giving grand rounds at Kaiser Honolulu, and they were thinking about putting this patient on octreotide, even though she didn't have a brain tumor, for the same reason, to try to block insulin release. And there I am with her, and her mother was there as well. And they went ahead and did it, and here she is 1.5 years later at her high school graduation. Now, who here thinks this is behavior? Who here thinks that this was a choice that the patient made? This is biochemistry. The biochemistry drives the behavior. When your insulin is up, you store and you don't burn, which means you have gluttony and you have sloth. Gluttony and sloth are not the cause of obesity, they are the result of the biochemical process that leads to obesity. The biochemistry comes first, and when you understand that, it opens up a whole new world of ways to fix this problem. So does this work in regular adults? The answer is yes, it does. So here's a patient with the same insulin problem, no brain tumor, no stroked hypothalamus, no car accidents, just a plain old fat lady, okay? Christmas 1988, holding up some food, it looks like. And here, on the drug, she's 35 pounds lighter in her jogging togs because she wanted to show me that she felt better and actually had the energy to exercise. The reason? Because she wasn't storing it, she had it to burn. So how does this all work? Well, the key to this whole question is, what was that X? That X, that blocked insulin signaling. It was insulin. Insulin blocks leptin signaling. And now there are a whole host of molecular and genetic studies which demonstrate how this works. Insulin blocks leptin, and I don't have time to go into the neuroanatomy of why this is true, just accept that there are plenty of scientific investigations that explain why this is true. So leptin is the satiety hormone, and insulin is the thing that blocks leptin. So when your insulin goes up, your brain says, I need more, and I'm not going to exercise. Well, we're all now hyperinsulinemic. If you look at glucose tolerance tests done today over, say, 40 years ago, we are releasing 2 to 3 times the amount of insulin than we used to. And the question is, where did the excess insulin come from? I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to let Will Smith tell you. Everybody know who Will Smith is? Good. All right, good.
Sorry, I can't talk right. I got some secret cases of my own. Let me tell you what the video game. All right, I'm hanging on. Sure.
You know, if Hollywood knows this, why don't you? In fact, sugar is the most destructive force in the universe, and I'm going to explain why. This is what you have been fed for the last 50 years. It's on this slide. Everybody know this Coca-Cola Coming Together ad? Okay, they were going to show it on the Super Bowl, but people complained and they ultimately pulled it. Thank God. Beating obesity will take action by all of us based on one simple common sense fact. All calories count, no matter where they come from, including Coca-Cola and everything else with calories. That's what they say. So you can get your calories from carrots, or you can get your calories from cheesecake, or you can get your calories from Coca-Cola or anything else with a C for that matter. It makes no difference. If you eat more than you burn, you'll gain weight. If you eat less than you burn, you will lose weight. It says so right in the ad. Now, who here believes that? Oh, come on, you all do. Or maybe you don't. I don't know. That's why you're here. I don't know. But the bottom line is that's what society believes. That's what your politicians believe. And to be honest with you, that's what your doctor believes. Because they keep saying, if you just eat less and exercise more, you'd lose weight. Except it doesn't work. First of all, you can't eat less. Why can't you eat less? Because if you ate less, now you'd be leptin deficient on top of being leptin resistant. That's the recidivism of obesity. And you can't exercise more because if you exercise more, you gain weight. You gain muscle. And that's good because muscle have mitochondria and you improve your insulin dynamics and you improve your metabolic health, and exercise is the single best thing you can do for yourself. But there's not one article in the entire world's literature that shows that exercise alone promotes weight loss. But there are all these doctors saying, eat less, exercise more. And as far as I'm concerned, any doctor who says eat less, exercise more is guilty of malpractice. And I said it. Because inherently what they are saying is it's your fault. And this isn't anybody's fault. No one chooses to be obese, certainly not children, and certainly not 6-month-olds, and certainly not newborns. And we have an epidemic of obese newborns. They don't diet and exercise. How do you explain their obesity? Any hypothesis you want to proffer about the obesity epidemic has to explain the obese newborn, and you can't. Because it's not true. It never was. If a food company tells you something, believe the opposite. Because the science says something else entirely. Because some calories cause disease more than others. Because different calories are metabolized differently. Because a calorie is not a calorie. And of course, in this audience, I know that that resonates with you because, after all, this is a low-carb forum to some extent, and we're going to talk about that. But the bottom line is, if you believe that a calorie is a calorie, you are lost, and so is society, and we will never fix this problem. Here's the curse of processed food. There are 3 things that there are too little of, and there are 5 things that there are too much of. And here they are. There's not enough fiber. Why is fiber important? Because fiber limits the rate of absorption of nutrients from the gut into the bloodstream, giving your liver a chance to catch up. It allows your liver to metabolize energy properly so that you don't overload it. Because when you overload it, it turns into liver fat. Omega-3 fatty acids And you get those in wild fish, not in farmed fish. And I was just told by Andreas and Esther last night that a lot of the fish here in Norway is farmed. And I was really quite shocked. I had no idea. Micronutrients. Zoe Harcum has a whole book out on the fact that as we've bred produce to be sweeter, the amount of nutrients in them has actually gone down. So we are now micronutrient deficient. And the things that there are too much of, trans fats, and they're still around, but as you may have heard that just 2 days ago, our Food and Drug Administration finally got trans fats off the generally recognized as safe list. Yay. Only took 25 years. And so trans fats will start disappearing from the world's diet, and that is a very good thing. Why it took 25 years is another story. Branched chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, and valine. These are essential amino acids that you must consume. You can't make them. So that means that levels in your blood have to do with what you ate. And it turns out that the way these are metabolized, they go straight to your liver and cause liver fat accumulation. And where do you get these from? Corn-fed beef, corn-fed fish, corn-fed chicken. That's all of our meat. Omega-6 fatty acids. Those come from plant oils and polyunsaturates. Now you need omega-6s because they're part of your immune system. But you don't need too many because what that does is it makes your immune system hyper-inflammatory. And alcohol, but kids don't drink alcohol, at least not most. And finally, the big one, the big kahuna, the one we're going to spend the rest of the time on, sugar, because sugar is the one that is specifically added by the food industry for its own purposes, not for yours. So the rest of the information I'm going to give you today is contained in these two lay articles, one called Is Sugar Toxic from the New York Times Magazine, written by Gary Taubes about our research at UCSF, and you can pull that up right here. And also this Nature comment last year, The Toxic Truth About Sugar, which generated more heat than light, unfortunately. So what are we talking about? In America, we're talking about this, high fructose corn syrup. You got that here over in Norway? No? Okay. Be glad. Okay, but the fact is, you got this stuff instead. It's called sucrose. Now, high fructose corn syrup is 1 glucose, 6-membered ring, 1 fructose, 5-membered ring. Now, glucose is the energy of life. Every cell on the planet metabolizes glucose for energy. Glucose is so important that your body will make it if you don't eat it. So you low carbers, you've got a serum glucose whether you like it or not. Okay? That doesn't mean you have to overdose on it, and I understand, and I'm not against low carb. For some people, I'm for it. Depends on the patient. Okay? But the bottom line is, glucose is essential. This one over here, fructose, there is not one biochemical reaction in the entire mammalian literature that requires dietary fructose to run. There is a disease called hereditary fructose intolerance that I have to take care of, HFI. These patients are born without an enzyme in the liver that can metabolize fructose. It's called aldolase B. These patients, the first time they're exposed to fructose, maybe when they're 6 months of age, and their mother gives them their first bottle of orange juice, their blood sugar goes down to 5. They get hypoglycemic, they have seizures, they show up in our emergency room. We figure out what's wrong with them. We do a liver biopsy to show the enzymes missing. These people have to go on a fructose-free diet, a sugar-free diet for the rest of their natural lives. There is a registry of these patients at the University of California, Berkeley. These are the healthiest people on the planet. You do not need sugar, fructose, sugar, the sweet stuff, sugar, to live. You need glucose to live. You don't need this one. Everybody got that? Now, high fructose corn syrup, the two molecules are separate. They're free. But this is sucrose. This is table sugar, cane sugar, beet sugar, the stuff you put in your coffee. 1 glucose, 1 fructose, O-glycosidic linkage. The enzyme in the intestine, sucrase, cleaves this in about a nanosecond. You absorb the two moieties just the same. They're the same. They're the same. So, yeah, America, we have high fructose corn syrup. Japan has high fructose corn syrup. Canada has high fructose corn syrup. And the rest of the world doesn't, and it doesn't matter. Because the rest of the world has sugar, and they have lots of it. And that's the problem. Here are the 10 most obese states in the United States. Anybody been to any of them? It's really ugly, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Here are the 10 laziest states in the nation. What's going on over there in Nevada? Guess you can only burn so much energy going like this. 10 most unhappy states in the nation. Okay, here's the adult diabetes rate. Here's the adult heart disease rate. And here's soda per capita consumption. What do you see? Now, this is correlation, not causation. I understand that. I know the difference. You can't tell which direction the effect goes. Is it that sugar causes heart disease and diabetes and unhappiness and obesity? Or is it that obese, unhappy, diabetic, heart disease patients like to go out and consume sugar? You can't tell. You don't know. Correlation is not causation. I agree. What's going on over the world? Well, here's sugar consumption tripling over the past 50 years for the whole world. Here's per capita consumption. Notice Brazil. Brazil used to be so poor, they could only export their sugar. They couldn't afford their own. But now they're a brick country, right? And they have Embraer jets and biodiesel and World Cups and Olympics, and they got money coming in, and now they can afford their own sugar. They now have the highest rate of increase of type 2 diabetes on the planet. Not the highest prevalence, but the highest rate of increase of prevalence. Who has the highest prevalence? Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, Kuwait, and Malaysia. Why them? No alcohol. But they got soft drinks like they're going out of style. Because it's hot, because the water supply is a question mark, and no alcohol. This is their reward. This is how they reward themselves in the absence of alcohol. But you know what? I would really rather have alcohol. Because you can only drink yourself under the table once a day. But with soft drinks, all day, all night, no stopping. And that's exactly what they do. That's why they have the highest diabetes rates in the world. Now, remember, this is all correlation. But now we have causation too. So this is a study that we did in February, came out in the journal PLOS ONE. And what we showed is that sugar correlates with diabetes prevalence worldwide over the decade, country by country, factoring out everything. Factoring out total calories. Everyone thinks sugar is bad because it's calories. No. Sugar is bad because it's sugar. We factored out obesity, we factored out total calories, obesity, physical activity, urbanization, aging, and GDP from all of this. And we watched the movie, we watched the timeline over the decade to show that sugar availability, country by country, predicted diabetes rates over the last decade. Here's your take-home message from this study. Only changes in sugar availability predicted changes in diabetes prevalence. Every extra 150 calories that the world ate increased diabetes prevalence by 0.1%. Nothing. But if those 150 calories happened to be a can of soda instead, diabetes prevalence increased 11-fold by 1.1%. And in America, we're not consuming 1 can of soda's worth of sugar, we're consuming 2.5. So take that up to 2.4%. Considering in America, we have a diabetes rate of 8.3%. That means that 29% of all of the diabetes in America is due to sugar and sugar alone, nothing else. Not obesity, not calories, not anything else in the diet, just sugar alone. You want something that's actionable, something to fix, that's a great place to start. In addition, this study meets what is known as the Austin-Bradford-Hill criteria for what we call causal medical inference. This was the level of criteria that was used to show that tobacco causes lung cancer. Okay? Who here believes in global warming? Why? You got proof? You got scientific proof? You got a control group? Who here believes that football trauma causes Alzheimer's disease? Do you even know what football? You think that's soccer. I'm talking about American football. Who here believes that tobacco causes lung cancer? You got a control group? Have you ever taken a group of naive people and exposed them to 50 years of tobacco smoke and see what happens? That would be impossible, unlawful, and unfair. Can't be done. What we have is causal medical inference for each of these. This is causal medical inference for sugar and diabetes. Okay? Because a calorie is not a calorie. If you believe a calorie is a calorie, all is lost. You will never fix this problem. Fructose is not glucose. The first problem, fructose metabolism, is different from that of glucose because of how it's handled in the mitochondria, and I'll show you that in a moment. The second problem is fructose is 7 times more likely to bind to proteins and cause what's known as the Maillard reaction, the browning reaction, the reason you slather barbecue sauce on your meat to make it nice and brown. Okay, that's going on inside your body as we speak. And if you had orange juice, that's happening 7 times faster. That is cellular aging. So when you consume sugar, you age faster. Now, just to show you what happens. This is a study that my colleague Jean-Marc Schwartz did. He took normal adults and for 2 weeks fed them either high sugar or high complex carbs, isocaloric, so same number of calories, and then did what we call MRS, magnetic resonance spectroscopy, to measure liver fat. Okay? On the same number of calories, sugar versus complex carbs, same number of calories. Everybody got it? So here's the sugar, here's the complex carbs, here's the lipid profile right here. 38% increase in liver fat in 2 weeks alone. Now that cell aging process I was talking about, it's called the browning reaction. It throws off little hydrogen peroxides which damage cells. So here's a way of thinking about it. You can roast your meat at 375 degrees for an hour, or you can roast your meat at 98.6 degrees for 75 years. You get the same thing. You get the same answer. And if you don't believe me, here's rib cartilage from newborns, nice and white, going all the way up to rib cartilage from 88-year-olds, nice and brown. This is what you want to prevent. You want to stop that. But if fructose does it 7 times faster, you can see that fructose is driving cellular aging. So this is all the healthy part. Now let's get to the wise part. Are we wise? Let's start with addiction. Is sugar addictive? Everyone would agree that addictive people are not wise, correct? But if you take my Starbucks away from me, I will kill you. The lay public seems to know that sugar is addictive. There are all these books that keep coming out. Okay? How about this?
Without doing something to alter my consciousness. And it started with heroin. It started with sugar. Oh yeah, when I was 5, 6 years old, I was high in sugar. But as far as what to do now, sweets, sugar on bread and butter. I became addicted to sugar because it changed the way I felt.
Now the question is, what about humans? Now, the tolerance part we have down, just like I showed you. Okay? We know that sugar causes tolerance. The question is, does sugar cause withdrawal? That one's a little harder, and the reason is because it's all mixed up with caffeine. Because the people who are sugar addicts, for the most part, are the soda drinkers. And so when you try to get them off soda, they're also going off caffeine at the same time they're going off sugar. And so it's hard to piece apart which it is. But I'm just going to show you a 20-second clip from this movie. Anybody know what this movie is? Okay, everybody watch it? If second graders learn nothing else about obesity from what they learned in this movie, it would be enough. But I'm going to just show you day 18. Day 18. So Morgan Spurlock went on a 1-month McDonald's binge. Okay? He was a vegan before that because his girlfriend was a vegan chef. Okay? And in 18 days, what did he just describe? Withdrawal. That was withdrawal. Now, this is an N of 1, okay, and I understand that. But the fact of the matter is, that's what our patients tell us too. Okay. Could sugar, in fact, be addictive? Well, indeed, we've known this for years. Anybody know what this is? Anybody ever seen this before? Any obstetricians in the room? Any pediatricians in the room? This is called sweeties. Sweeties. And what it is it's a super concentrated sugar solution that you dip the pacifier in and then stick it in the newborn boy's mouth before you do the circumcision. Because it releases dopamine and opioids in the reward center. This is baby narcotic. That's what this is. Okay? The Jews use wine, everybody else uses sweeties. Okay? But that's the bottom line. This is baby narcotic. So does it shock anyone that sugar might have addictive properties? Now, what about behavior changes? What about irritability? Does anybody know, have anybody ever heard of the term the Twinkie defense? This might be very American. The Twinkie defense. Anybody ever heard the story of Harvey Milk? Anybody know about Harvey Milk? Harvey Milk was a San Francisco supervisor who was the first openly gay politician in America, in San Francisco. And he was assassinated along with Mayor George Moscone by another supervisor, Dan White, back in 1979. And at his trial, Dan White's lawyers presented as his defense the Twinkie defense, that he was so hyped up on junk food that he went temporarily insane. He didn't know what he was doing. He was so irritable that he basically was not responsible for his actions. That's the Twinkie defense. And of course, he went to jail for a very long time. And he was released from jail 25 years later, and he committed suicide 2 days after that. That's a very bad story. But this is a paper that came out called The Twinkie Defense, relationship between carbonated, non-diet, in other words, sugar-containing soft drinks, and violence perpetration amongst Boston high school students, showing that kids in high school who are violent drink a lot of soda. Now, the question again is directionality. Is it that sugar causes violence, or is it that violent people drink sugar? We don't know. It's correlation, not causation. But this just came out a month ago in Journal of Pediatrics. Soft drink consumption is associated with behavior problems in 5-year-olds. And we have a lot of kids with a lot of behavior problems now. Begs the question, the earlier you get, the more likely that something going on is causative rather than effect. And lastly, from the why standpoint, dementia, something that all of us will need to worry about soon enough. Does sugar cause dementia? What do you think? Well, here's what we know. We know obesity is associated with dementia. That's a slam dunk. We've known that for years. We know that from animal models that obesity alters neural projections that are consistent with dementia. We know that sugar causes insulin resistance because of how it's metabolized in the liver, and we know that insulin resistance is associated with dementia. High insulin levels in humans are associated with dementia. The Western diet correlates with dementia. We know in animal studies that you can give them fat or sugar and get them to be obese, but only sugar causes cognitive decline, not fat. But do we have causative data? Not yet. In animals, we have causative data. In humans, still just correlative data. We don't know yet. I understand that. Correlation is not causation, but it's certainly food for thought, if nothing else. At the American Heart Association, we know that there's a problem. And in 2009, we said we need to reduce our consumption in America of added sugar, from 22 teaspoons a day on average down to 9 for males and 6 for females, a reduction by 2/3 to 3/4. The problem is, how do you do that when of the 600,000 items in the American food supply, 80% of them are spiked with added sugar, specifically because the food industry knows that when they add it, you buy more. And it's perfectly legal. They're allowed. Now, if a calorie is a calorie, well, then you eat those empty calories and you just eat less of something else. No problem. But what if a calorie is not a calorie? Then it's a big problem because you can't avoid it. You can't get away from it. It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. And it's causing disease everywhere they've adopted the Western diet. And that includes Norway. So that leaves us with the question of who's wealthy? Is it you? Are you wealthy? I'll tell you who's wealthy. Take a look at how our food dollars have been reallocated. 1982, 2012, 30-year interval. Meats, way down by 10%, because we were all told to go low fat. And as far as I'm concerned, if something says low fat, it might as well have a skull and crossbones on it instead. Fruits and vegetables. We're all told we need to eat our fruits and vegetables. Notice, 14.5%, 14.6%. We're eating just as many fruits and vegetables as we ever did. Grains and baked goods, 13%, 14%. And that is a problem because that drives insulin up as well. Refined carbohydrate drives insulin up as well. And so that is certainly part of the issue, but it's not the whole ball of wax. Dairy products, 13% down to 10.6% because now we're all lactose intolerant. Finally, processed foods and sweets, 11.6%, 22.9%, a doubling in 30 years. That is what has happened to our food supply. And we've allowed it to happen. It's happened with our tacit approval because we buy it. So the question is, why does the food industry do this? There are two precepts. There are two philosophies of business. One is we give the public what it wants, in which case they're reactive. And the other is, if you build it, they will come. And that's proactive. And the food industry does both. They do both. They built it, and now we come. Because it's addictive. Because we can't stop. And who's wealthy? Well, the shareholders. That's who's wealthy. Because here's the Standard & Poor's 500 right here. Here's the economic downturn of 2008. And here's the stock price for McDonald's, Coke, and Pepsi, all doing better than the S&P 500 over the last 7 years. And here's Hormel, Archer Daniels Midland, General Mills, Kraft, ConAgra, and Hormel, Procter & Gamble, all doing better than the S&P. Want to make money, invest in a food company. Now, there is some sanity coming to this issue. This came out 1 month ago. This, everybody know the investment bank, the International Investment Bank, Credit Suisse. And they published this research report called Sugar, Consumption at a Crossroads. And remember, they're a bank. Their job is to make money. And you know what they said? We believe higher taxation on sugary food and drinks would be the best option to reduce sugar intake and help fund the fast-growing healthcare costs associated with type 2 diabetes and obesity. A bank said that. Not a doctor, a bank. The American Heart Association this morning came out in favor of sugar taxation. And I'm sure you all heard that just a week ago, the country of Mexico approved a 1 peso per ounce soda tax, and they don't even have potable water. This is coming, everybody, whether you like it or not. You better like it because it's for your own good. Because if you're addicted, you're screwed, and the whole world is addicted. This is my second to last slide. This is a paper that came out just 3 months ago, and it's called Profits and Pandemics: Prevention of Harmful Effects of Tobacco, Alcohol, and Ultra-Processed Food and Drink Industries. And what it says is that there are two medicines. There's the old medicine that I learned 30 years ago when I was in medical school, where the disease were infections and the vector were microbes. The new medicine is all about chronic disease, but we have a new vector, and it's multinational corporations. And we're going to have to fight them as hard as we have fought bacteria. The difference is multinational corporations are much harder to fight. With that, I'm going to leave you with the fact that we have some books that are not here today, but Fat Chance was a book I wrote regarding this in English. Lillemann is translating it into Norwegian, and it will be available on the first of the year as an electronic book. This is a shopper's guide. Here in America, at least, sugar has 56 names so that people can take their iPad or their Kindle into the store and actually figure out what to buy based on what the sugar content is. And in January, we will come out with the Fat Chance Cookbook, over 100 recipes, all vetted by high school students to be preparable within a school period, and kids will eat. And it's all real food. How about that? Lastly, we have started a nonprofit to take this on. Okay, a 501c3 nonprofit to promote nutritional, medical, and legal analysis and consultation against the food industry, called the Institute for Responsible Nutrition. We will have 4 planks in our platform: education, research, advocacy, and action. The goal is to get the industry to do the right thing, because they won't do it themselves, and Congress won't either, because they're in bed with the food industry. This is going to be a grassroots, bottom-up phenomenon, and we're going to need all of your help, all of your support. We're going to need global partners. We already have partners in England, Australia, New Zealand, and we would love to partner with the people in Norway to fix the food supply once and for all. I want to thank my collaborators at UCSF who are listed on this slide, and with that, I thank you for your attention. All right, so something I did not talk about during the hour, which several people asked me about, and I very specifically don't talk about it, at least during the course of the talk, and there's a reason, but everybody asked me about it, so I will address it as a comment. Well, if we can't have sugar, what can we have? What about diet sweeteners? Everybody wants to know about diet sweeteners. What about Diet Coke? What about, Diet this? What about Splenda? What about stevia? What about aspartame? Et cetera, et cetera. Everybody wants to know about those. Short answer, we don't know. We don't know. They've been around for decades, and we don't know. Why don't we know? Because I'm dumb? Because I don't know anything? Because I don't read the literature? I read the literature very well. We don't know because the data don't exist. So why don't the data exist? Here's why. There's something called pharmacokinetics, and there's something called pharmacodynamics. Not working? All right. There's something called pharmacokinetics, and there's something called pharmacodynamics. They're not the same. Pharmacokinetics is what your body does to a drug. Pharmacodynamics is what a drug does to your body. They are not the same. Pharmacokinetics is about acute toxicity. What will make you keel over and die? That's pharmacokinetics. The FDA demands all the pharmacokinetics for all the diet sweeteners before they'll allow a sweetener to market. So we have all the pharmacokinetics for all the diet sweeteners because the FDA demands it. Because it's in their charter. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938 says that that's the FDA's job. Pharmacodynamics is not in the FDA's job. There's nothing about chronic toxicity in the FDA's job. That's how cigarettes made it on for as long as they did without any regulation, because it wasn't in the FDA's charter. So the food industry is basically left to their own devices because the FDA doesn't ask for it. And the food industry says, why in the world would we want to do studies that take a long time, require a lot of people, and could only hurt our sales? So the food industry says, we're not going to do them. So then the NIH says, well, that's the food industry's job. We're not going to pay for them. So we have an FDA who doesn't demand it, we have a food industry who won't do it, and we have an NIH who won't pay for it. No data. That's why there are no data. Second problem. You put something sweet on the tongue. Corticotympany nerve sends a message from the tongue to the hypothalamus. Remember that energy balance, ground zero. Sugar bolus is coming. Get ready to release the insulin vesicles. And so the hypothalamus tells the vagus nerve, remember the vagus nerve? Get ready to bolus a big insulin rush, because a big sugar bolus is coming. But then the sugar bolus never comes because it was a diet sweetener instead. What does the pancreas do? It's got all these insulin vesicles stored up, ready to go. Does it go, oh, I was waiting for that. Oh, I guess I'll just have to wait till tomorrow. Or does it go, I got all these insulin vesicles sitting here waiting to get released, and I'm going to go find some calories to go work on. And you end up overeating instead. We don't know that. Believe it or not, we still don't know that. However, we do have a little bit of information that's coming out regarding that. A paper came out in April of this year in Diabetes Care from Pepino et al., Janina Pepino, M-Y Pepino, P-E-P-I-N-O, from Washington University of St. Louis, in Sam Klein's group at WashU. And what they did was they took 17 morbidly obese adults without diabetes, and they did 2 oral glucose tolerance tests on them, a week apart, in randomized fashion, with or without a diet soda pre-treatment. In other words, give them the diet soda, then do the oral glucose tolerance test, or give them a glass of water and then do the oral glucose tolerance test. Everybody with me? So the question was, what was the difference in the response? Turned out, with the diet soda pre-treatment, the glucose tolerance test elicited a 20% increased insulin secretion over the course of the test. In other words, if you tell the tongue that sweet is coming, you're going to release more insulin whether the calories demand it or not. And if insulin is the driver of energy storage, as I've told you, which it is, you can see that diet drinks might foment weight gain as well. Now, that's just one study. We need more studies, and we need corroboration that that exists. But, am I worried about it? Yeah, I'm worried about it. But I can't tell you for sure that that's what's going on. So diet sweeteners may not be the answer to this problem. As far as I'm concerned, we need to de-sweeten our lives. Okay? Now, I'm going to throw a completely different idea at you, because this is my next book. What is the difference between happiness and pleasure? What do you think? Happiness is long-term, ethereal, spiritual, communal. Other people experience your happiness with you, and it can be everlasting. Pleasure is an hour, personal, visceral, easily obtained, and cheap, to say the least. I would argue that we're supposed to be pursuing happiness. It says so in our Declaration of Independence, the pursuit of happiness. And in the last 40 years, we have abdicated our pursuit of happiness for the pursuit of pleasure. And in the process, we've become most decidedly unhappy. And there's actually molecular mechanisms going on, because happiness is serotonin and pleasure is dopamine. And dopamine downregulates its own receptor. I told you that already. But serotonin does not. In other words, you can't overdose on too much happiness. But you can overdose on too much pleasure. And the food industry has made pleasure so cheap, because they put pleasure into everything, that we have become most decidedly unhappy. What do you think of that? So I'm not going to tell you the title of the book, because I don't want somebody to write it before me. But the fact is that we basically need to reorient our lives, reorient our nutritional lives. We need to reorient our spiritual lives. We need to reorient what it is that's supposed to happen in our lives. Everybody familiar with the Gross Happiness Index instead of the Gross National Income Index? Everybody familiar with that? Okay. So what country has the highest Gross National Happiness Index? Denmark, yes. Okay, Scandinavia, way to go. Okay, who's second? Bhutan. Bhutan. Denmark and Bhutan, you've got it absolutely nailed. Okay, America, with all of our money, we are 44th. Okay, that's the problem. Okay, the issue is, what is it that you're supposed to be living for and why? Okay, when pleasure becomes cheap, basically it becomes a draw away from what it is you're supposed to be looking for. And I'm going to pose that to you as a homework assignment, a way to think about this, you know, in terms of your own lives and way to get grounded, as it were. Then the other thing I want to say is that everybody has been very, very positive in coming up to me, you know, in terms of, you know, what this means. But people said, so how are we going to fix it? You know, how are we going to fix it long term? The answer is, you can't fix it alone. None of you can fix this alone. That's exactly what government is for. It's for things where individuals can't fix it alone. Government's going to have to get involved in this. Now, they don't want to get involved in this because they consider this a personal responsibility issue. So the question is, when does a personal responsibility issue become a public health crisis? Have we ever had any personal responsibility issues before that became a public health crisis? How about all of them? All of them started out as personal responsibility issues before they became a public health crisis. The most recent one, HIV. So let's talk about HIV for a minute. 1979, patient zero. 1981, the term AIDS gets coined. 1986, our Surgeon General, Chick Coop, says, we've got a problem here. When did HIV become a public health crisis? What year? Anybody want to guess?
88.
Later. He said 88. I said later. Come on, we can have a pool. Who says 89? Who says 90? Who says 91? November 12th, 1991. That was the date. November 12th, 1991 is the date that HIV became a public health crisis. Why? What happened on November 12th, 1991? Magic Johnson declared that he had HIV. And all of a sudden, everyone went, holy, anyone can get this. I could get this. Up to that point, it was the gays, the addicts, and the hemophiliacs. And now, all of a sudden, it's everybody. Okay? The day that everyone becomes at risk is the day it becomes a public health crisis. Well, I just showed you, everyone's at risk. So this is not a personal responsibility issue. This is a public health crisis, and it has to be dealt with in a public health fashion. And that means government. So anyone here who still is on the personal responsibility bandwagon, okay, I want to see you outside. Okay? The point is that politics leads from behind. They will not do anything until they think that the public will support it. Well, you have to make them understand it's their job. That's your job.